okay? Distance right here. Being a native Texan, I am not a fan of the weather. My wife loves it in Pennsylvania. She says she'll never leave. Anything below about 20 makes me really miss Houston. Although I'll admit the summers are pretty brutal down there. She read my bio. I think that probably pretty much covers everything. I've been a fan of talk radio probably going back 25 years, and really didn't get thinking seriously about getting actively involved outside of the normal stuff you do as a citizen, voting and supporting candidates until again after Obama was reelected, which really blew me away. I really thought the numbers were really against him, and so for me it was kind of a signal that, hey, sitting back is not going to get it. My kids are of an age where they need to see me being involved and standing on principle, doing the right thing. So in any event, I got involved in Convention of the States at that point. So here's what I'm going to talk about tonight, and I've got a fair number of slides, but I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. So if you have questions, we can hold them to the end. Also, I've got hard copies of this deck with me. I've got 50 copies. If you don't get one and want one, let me know. Give me your contact information. I'm happy to send it to you. So you don't have to worry about taking notes or trying to memorize anything in terms of what's in the deck. Just focus on your questions, and you can have the deck for reference later. So I'll talk about state convention history of Article 5 applications. I'll talk a little bit about, or maybe a lot about, the objections that at least I've heard to the option. Talk about Article 5 process advantages, and then if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about options. To start out with, language is really important. I've discovered as I've gotten involved in Article 5 convention issues. And so I want to talk just for a brief moment about what I'm going to talk about and what I mean by a convention. I've heard multiple folks define a constitutional convention in multiple ways. I've listed some of them up here. A convention organized by a number of states for the purpose of replacing the current Constitution. I would agree that that's a constitutional convention. The others on the list I would not define as necessarily a constitutional convention. Others may say it doesn't start out as one, but it winds up being one. I understand all that. For me, and what I'm going to talk about tonight is a convention that's called under Article 5 for the purposes of proposing amendments to the current Constitution consistent with the state application language. And here's a disclaimer. I believe that calling a convention for the purposes of creating a brand new Constitution or of altering the existing Constitution in any way that does not comport with the framers' intent would be a huge mistake. And neither I nor anyone at COS support, endorse, or otherwise approve of such an effort. And I took the trouble to send this down to the national office, had counsel review it, didn't want to say anything they didn't agree with. So at least the national office folks and Steve Davies, this is what I believe. All right, let's talk a little bit about history, and I know many of you probably know more about constitutional history and perhaps early history of the nation and republic than I do, but in researching for this presentation for the event tonight, I did do some looking at what's been the history in this nation of conventions going back before Declaration of Independence, and there's a fairly robust history, particularly common in the Northeast and the New England states. The colonies always had a history of working together, particularly around defense issues. They would get together, either the Crown would call conventions of the colonial governors, or the colonies themselves would call themselves together in what's called a full dress convention, where there would be delegates selected and they would attend. And so I've listed some examples here. Again, up through about the 1750s, these were all generally around defense issues, either frontier issues with Indians, and getting into the 1750s, the French and Indian War started heating up, which is really the North American front for a war between France and England. And there was a lot of discussion at that point, particularly in New York, what are we going to do about the French and the Indians? And then going on later into the 1770s and 60s, there began to be more discussions about the issues with Great Britain and what we as a nation would be doing about that. I want to call out 4 conferences in particular, mainly because there were either a large number of colonies that attended, or there was a significant outcome. And these conferences here were ones that, because of the way they were formed and the large participation and again the quality or content of the output, these tended to be a model for what the framers were thinking of when they wrote the Article 5 language, calling for a convention as an option to amend the Constitution. So after the Declaration of Independence, the convention game didn't stop. The states, at that time, they would have been sovereign states, got together to talk about a variety of issues. Generally, these were either commerce related, there were border disputes that they got together to talk about, again, predominantly in the Northeast, but there were also some conventions that included states from the Mid-Atlantic and south of that area. And again, I've called out 3 here in particular as being a large number of states that participated. Obviously, the one in Annapolis in 1786, really the failure of that convention is what led to the convention in 1787 that at the time they referred to as the Philadelphia Convention. I think modern terminology is a constitutional convention. So if you go back and take a look at what the available literature is, the documentation we have of these various conventions, again, going up through 1787, you can see that during the founding era, calls and applications for conventions were occasionally rescinded and they were made conditional. You'll see that the states were free during the founding era to honor or reject calls. They didn't have to show up. In fact, in 1786, many did not go to Annapolis, which in my reading, Washington was pretty upset about that and was concerned about the 1787 convention. Didn't even want to go if it was going to be another kind of no-show from a large number of states. So again, some states went, some didn't. It just depended, I guess, on if they had time or were interested. States were able to select commission pay, instruct their delegates as they wished, and they could also alter instructions and recall after the convention was convened. The states could define subject matter for conventions. They could instruct their delegates which way to vote. After the conventions were called, the conventions got together once they were in session and made the rules for the convention, elected officers, staff committees, set times of adjournment, that sort of thing, more ministerial sorts of things. To my knowledge, the only attempts during the founding era to insert in the convention call things other than time, place, and subject matter were unsuccessful. I know Massachusetts tried on at least one occasion to suggest that there needs to be something other than one state, one vote. That was rejected. And so by 1787, it appears the framers had extensive knowledge, either personal experience with conventions, attending them themselves, or they had significant knowledge of how these things are supposed to work with respect to a group of sovereign entities getting together to resolve an issue. So I think the perspective the framers had, going back to 1787, when they drafted the Article 5 language, when Mason raised his hand and said we need to have a convention option, when people heard the word convention, I think this is what they were thinking about. An intergovernmental diplomatic gathering, a forum in which states could meet on the basis of sovereign equality, a mechanism that would put the states on equal footing with Congress in proposing amendments, and that they would be attended by commissioners rather than delegates. They used the term commissioner, who would operate under agency law and remain within the limits of their commissions. Agency law means they were going as an agent of a sovereign entity. So to kind of emphasize and underscore that, if you compare what the Article 5 Convention intent was to what the pre-constitutional convention's intent was, I think the framers were very careful in Article 5 to suggest that there are some things that we need to do differently compared to the way conventions were called and managed in the past. So for Article 5, the intent would be to propose solutions only, not to actually resolve issues. Plenipotentiary was not authorized. That meant they couldn't just talk about anything. There was a defined scope, a defined agenda. Applications would come from the states only, not from Congress or from anybody else. The call for the convention would come from Congress. A few states could not get together and kind of unilaterally call a convention. It had to be something that came from Congress to give it substance, I think, status and stature within the Republic, and that the calls would be mandatory if at least 2/3 of the states applied. And then Congress would have the ability to determine the state amendment review process, be it by state convention or by the state legislature. So Congress has that option to determine which way to go, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Modern era state conventions, many don't realize that the state conventions continue. We have state conventions ongoing. They really fall into two basic categories, either interstate compacts, generally around environmental and water rights issues. These are things where the states agree legally to be bound to compact rules or regulations, and these things require the approval of Congress. Uniform laws is different. This is where the states get together in conference. There's actually a conference of commissioners that is a standing group that organizes these conferences. The members typically appointed by state governors, and they get together to ensure that state laws are consistent. They don't get together to create a new universal law that covers all the states. That's not the point. The point is for things that are outside federal jurisdiction, like tort, contract and family law, the states would have common rules around those sorts of things so that when issues came up, citizens moving back and forth between states, these things could be handled consistently. Uniform Commercial Code is probably the best example of that. So I'm going to move on to talk about Article 5. After the Constitution was adopted and ratified, the following year, Virginia actually dropped the first Article 5 application. Their intent was to get everybody back together to talk about things that came up during the ratification conferences with the states and get the defects corrected. And as many of you know, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, were not part of the original Constitution. They came later with the first Congress, and as I recall, Madison really had to prod them to get them together and to do it. He felt like they'd made a commitment. As a matter of honor, they needed to get together and make this right, and so ultimately it happened. Between 1788 and 2014, there's, by my count, been 728 Article 5 applications from all 50 states on a variety of topics. I'm not going to read the rest of these. You guys will get a copy of the handout, but suffice it to say there's been a large number of these things, including, if you look at certain time frames, there's been enough conventions called in terms of raw bean count from enough states to actually have a convention called. I think one of the reasons, or probably the primary reason why that hasn't happened, well, two. One is that in many cases the applications were not all on the same topic, so from a bean count perspective, you could arguably say that I don't have, as Congress, enough applications on the same topic to warrant a 2/3 count to call a convention. And I think, frankly, in other cases, there may have actually been enough. But Congress didn't call the convention, the states didn't push it, so it got kicked down the road. Some more data here, some more stats. I won't get into that, but the last bullet here I'll talk about a little bit. Again, researching in my role as state director, I came across information that made it clear that Pennsylvania actually has submitted applications for Article 5 conventions regarding at least 4 topics going back to 1900. You can see data, you can see evidence, see documentation that there was a call for direct election of senators around the turn of the last century. There was some things in the 40s around income tax and other fiscal limits on government spending. And then more currently, at least for my generation, right to life call was passed in 1979 by the State Assembly, and they also passed a balanced budget resolution in 1979. So there's a lot of talk about how many do we really have that have requested a balanced budget convention. And when you look at the list, if it's 27 or whatever the number is, I think it's in the mid-20s right now, understand Pennsylvania is one of those states. In 2014, there have been 12 Article 5 applications, 6 for the balanced budget amendment, 3 for Convention of States, which is the organization obviously that I'm part of. And then 3 other states have passed applications calling for a convention to talk about limits on campaign donation or campaign finance reform. So those are the 12 we've had for 14, and presumably we'll continue to have these things dropping in, going forward. So let's talk about Article 5 objections. I've got a list, probably familiar to a lot of folks here in the room. It's going to be a con-con. The delegates cannot be prevented from proposing and adopting amendments that would in effect rewrite the Constitution. In conjunction with that, the delegates can also change the ratification rule for amendments, similar allegedly to what happened in 1787. It won't matter. The Fed ignores the Constitution now. Federal courts will not rule in favor of the states in any dispute involving Article 5 convention processes, so the deck is stacked against the states. Educating voters and electing the right members of Congress is the best thing to do. Congress has the authority to control all aspects of any convention, including delegate count, selection, and voting rules. And the states should be nullifying federal laws, not pursuing a convention. And then George Soros is behind all of this anyway. So one of the things that, again, looking at some of the history and reading back on founders, framers' notes, I've noticed there's been a little bit of an evolution of language around Article 5 conventions. In the Constitution itself, originally it said a convention for the purposes, and still does, of proposing amendments to the Constitution. In the early 1800s, somewhere along the line, folks started talking about this being a constitutional convention for the purposes of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Again, all in the context of Article 5. And now, today, in some forms, you'll hear folks talking about Article 5 resulting in a constitutional convention to create a new constitution. So the language is morphing on us, and I think it's important to understand that. And again, the reason why I have my disclaimer and my definitions up front is to let you know that the yellow box is where I am on Article 5, not the other stuff. So a runaway convention, it's really a con-con. One of the things that's interesting is if you take a look at the two processes we have to amend the Constitution, they're very, very similar. The people elect representatives, the representatives get together in some form to adopt amendments, and then if enough members of Congress, in the case of the top line, agreed on amendment language, then it would go to the states for ratification. And the 27 amendments that we have so far, that's how we got all 27 of them, was through that process. The second process is Article 5, basically, and the thing that's different, as you can tell, is what happens within these two bands right here. In one case, you've got 535 members of Congress, and in another case, you've got delegates or commissioners that are selected by the state legislatures. And if, in theory, each state picks 10, that would give you 500. So you've got roughly 500 people, men and women, in both cases. In my hypothetical case, if there's 10 per state, making a determination about what ought to be recommended to be an amendment, and then after they're done and the appropriate vote level is reached, then it would go back out to the states. In my discussions with other folks on this topic, often it comes down to the convention delegates, that these guys, ladies, will be totally out of control. There's really no hooks on them. There's no strings attached. Once the convention's convened, they're on their own. They can do whatever. And we're off and running, and we'll just have to wait and see what they come out with. When you probe on that a little bit, it turns out that the problem is really not the convention delegates, according to some. It's Congress, it's the state legislatures, and it's we the people that voted for these knuckleheads to sit in these bodies. That's the problem. So it's not just the convention delegates, it's really everybody, all of us. And I don't disagree with that. I think, though it's a matter of degree, I think Congress is a huge problem, and I agree that we can expect no help from the current Congress at all in regards to things that we're all talking about and interested in tonight. And this last week's debacle with Boehner and the voting and whatnot is just reinforces at least my view of how screwed up DC is. So I've got them in red. You'll see that I've got the state legislatures and the convention delegates in pink. I don't think they're as bad as Congress, but they're definitely not lily white. The convention delegates, I don't know, obviously, in advance who the states will select or how they'll select them. I think it's fair to say that they'll be state representatives and senators themselves potentially would be the convention delegates. So I colored them in the same color. And then the people, us, I think there's a lot of people that are red in this country. There's no question about it. But I think there's a lot of people that are a long ways away from red, including everybody in this room. I don't care if you're John Birch Society or not. I think anybody in this room would be an excellent convention delegate, frankly. You love the Constitution, you love God, you love the country. That's the kind of people I think need to be at this thing. And so I think it's possible that the people can make this process work. I know there's a lot of debate about that, but that's why you'll see different colors on this slide. That's my personal view of where we are in the country right now. When you talk about runaway convention, you hear folks talk about, well, it's what happened originally with the Philadelphia Convention. They went outside the charter, all these bad things happened. I've listed out here the way the processes are either worked or intended to work in the case of the Article 5 process. You'll notice on the left-hand side there are 1787 Articles of Confederation. There's no arrow between Articles and the Philadelphia Convention. That's because there was nothing in the Articles of Confederation that contemplated a convention process. The Articles talked about unanimous approval from both Congress and the states, but there wasn't any language in there about a convention. That happened when the states got together and decided that's what they wanted to do, and they set it up and did it, which is one of the reasons I think why we have some real prescriptive detail in Article 5 about how this is supposed to work. So the Philadelphia Convention was held. They reported out the draft Constitution, recommended it be adopted, along with a different ratification process. All 13 states initiated ratification efforts, and one thing I discovered that I didn't know until this year is that 2 states had to have 2 conventions to actually ratify the Constitution. It didn't happen right out of the gate. So 9 states ratified the Constitution in 1788. It was declared to be in effect because they had the 3/4 vote. And the first year Congress was actually seated was in the following year in March, I believe, in 1789. The last state, Rhode Island, they were a pain then, they were a pain now, as far as I'm concerned. They didn't ratify until 1790. And frankly, and I'll admit, the only reason they ratified, their first convention failed. They met again and ratified because they had a gun to their head. The other 12 were ready to kick them out of the country and fine, you guys go it alone. And they knew that they couldn't survive, so they said, all right, fine. And I think it was only by 2 votes that it passed, by the way. Those guys are something else. All right, so again, I kind of talked about this a little bit, but when you look at the process that I had on the left here, the criticism you'll hear is the delegates exceeded the charter to just amend the articles, that they changed the ratification requirement from majority rule to 3/4, and that finally the fact that all 13 states initiated ratification efforts does not reflect unanimous approval by the states of a revised ratification process. We'll talk about some of that probably in the Q&A. So the other thing that I mentioned, you'll hear about convention outcomes will be ignored, as is the case with the Constitution. My view and the Convention of States' view is that there really are 2 constitutions. There's the one the framers originally gave us with the first 10 amendments, the original Constitution, the one that we all know and love. And then there's another Constitution. There's a Constitution that has been created by progressive attacks, by frankly, all 3 branches of the federal government, abdication of responsibility, Supreme Court deciding they know what's constitutional and what's not. And so we've got something out there that it kind of looks and feels like the old Constitution, but in practice it's not. That's the Constitution that I believe that in general is being adhered to by the federal government. Not obviously perfectly, but they're adhering to that one a heck of a lot closer than they are the original one. I believe that simple, concisely worded amendments will be extremely difficult to successfully challenge in court. I know that they'll fight it. If we wind up having an Article 5 convention, it'll be litigated on the way up, during, and on the way down. There's no question it will be litigated, and particularly by progressives and those that are very, very unhappy with whatever is accomplished in the convention relative to restricting federal control and federal power. But again, I think they'll ultimately have to pull back, and they'll have to do what they've done over the last 100 years. They'll start chipping away at it. As soon as the new amendments, if there are any that get ratified, I guarantee you the next year, the next day, the forces on the other side are going to say, all right, we had this convention and they passed all this stuff that really trimmed us back, but we got to figure out how can we undo this. We did it before, we'll try it again. And I think for the rest of us that are on the other side, we'll have to stay ever vigilant against that kind of a thing. I think any amendments that are ratified will enjoy huge political support. You'll have 38 states who would have ratified them. There'll be extensive debate. I can't imagine how bad it'll be in the media relative to this sort of an effort. But again, I think that if the convention is called, if amendments are reported out, and if they're ratified by 38 states, it'll be very, very difficult for anybody to lie down in front of that. And again, why not at least try? Stay the course, educate voters, vote for constitutional conservatives. I fully am in support of this. My only concern about this, the trajectory of the Fed over time has been to become less conservative. I think some things Congress will never approve, like term limits or repeal the 17th Amendment. I think those are both desirable. And again, I think it's kind of an all-of-the-above strategy like energy policy. Don't just do this or just do that. Let's do it all. Give it all a shot. Nullification. I've talked to many folks that believe this is the way to go. Even though it may not be specifically referenced and called out verbatim in the Constitution, it's clearly implied by the 10th Amendment, they would say. I think that that's a pretty big legal lift, frankly, but I'm not opposed to giving it a shot. If it can be made to happen, I think it's worth it. Again, kind of the all-of-the-above strategy. In some things I've read, folks have suggested that if you have a majority of the states pass a law, then you have one state nullified. Doesn't that create some chaos around who's playing by what rules? Maybe so. I don't know. But I think if it can work, if it can get us to where we need to be in terms of restoring the Constitution, I have no issue with it. You know, George Soros, there's no doubt the guy is monkeying around with all of our lives in various forms. I wish he was supporting us financially. He's not. Everything that I do coming here tonight, it's all on my dime. I'm not aware of anything that's being supported substantial donors like this for the Convention of the States. I know there are donors, but Soros is not one of them. I know he, in some of the groups that he would support or under, would love to have an Article 5 convention for campaign finance reform and probably other progressive initiatives. They'd probably love to repeal many of the first 10 amendments, many of the Bill of Rights, or change them dramatically. My view is if 34 states want to adopt something along these lines and they want to call a convention, and then if 38 states ratify it and they follow the process, they follow the law, and we wind up with a bunch of junk coming out of this, shame on us, but it's the law of the land, and it's up to us to make sure, whatever comes out of these conventions, if they're called or appropriate. And I think there's a lot of checks around that. And speaking of that, I'll talk a little bit about the Article 5 convention process and why at least I don't think it's going to be a con. Again, the states must apply for the same amendment topics, if not exact wording. I think exact wording going into convention with amendment wording would be a mistake, because I think things can happen in a convention where somebody may make a suggestion. I think the language could be dramatically improved if we could insert this or take that out. And arguably, if the convention call was for a specific language, and that's not what's adopted, then was it a legitimate convention? Is what they come out with legitimate? I think that's an argument that could be made. So leave it broad within defined parameters. States can, and frankly they are, adopting delegate limitation legislation, including delegate recall authority. There are 2 states right now that have done it in the last year, Georgia and Indiana, in anticipation of an Article 5 convention for whatever topic. States are also meeting to develop rules of order for any Article 5 convention. There's an organization called the Assembly of State Legislatures that's met 3 times. They're drafting up rules for any Article 5 convention, again, irrespective of content. About 30 states are involved in that right now. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, is not one, but I think as we get closer and closer to a convention potentially being called, you'll see more and more states getting on board with this bipartisan effort to come up with some rules for any convention that is held. And then frankly, I think convention proceedings will likely be completely transparent. I don't think the room will be open for anybody to be there because they won't want the disruption, but I do think it's reasonable to expect that there will be a live C-SPAN type broadcast of all conference proceedings. I think the delegates, whoever they are, will be under intense pressure and scrutiny. And I think it's highly unlikely that it'll be a closed door endeavor where you don't find out what they did or what they talked about until 3 or 4 or 5 months down the road. I think it's highly unlikely. If nothing else, it'll be on YouTube. Reasons for pursuing an Article 5 convention now, in my view, we have a state house composition that's very favorable. 69 of 99 state houses are now Republican controlled. That's a conservative move, if you will. It's for me, easier to talk to Republicans about an Article 5 convention than it is Democrats. It shouldn't be, but it is. So there's some indication for me anyway that if it's going to happen relatively easily, we've got that working in our favor in all the state houses. Intense grassroots or increasing grassroots support for decisive action. I think more and more people are becoming more and more aware of the problems we have in D.C. and what's happened to the Constitution, which is good for all of us. The more of our friends and neighbors that are paying attention and trying to get involved, again, whether you're John Birch Society or Convention of States, that's a good thing for all of us. I think the threat of a convention would have a real material positive impact in D.C. I think if we get down the path far enough, once you get 25, 28 states signing up for a convention, similar to balanced budget amendment, but for something that says we want to restrict the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, D.C. is going to react to that. They're going to fight it, no question about it, but they may also try to do some things to dial it back and do things that we would say would be in the right direction. Again, I think a successful convention could repair and restore major portions of the Constitution fairly quickly, again, depending on what's debated and what ultimately gets ratified by the states. And again, I don't think time is on our side. It gets worse and worse on a day-to-day basis, and it just gets harder and harder for us to get this thing turned around. There's a mathematical equation as an engineer that always trips us up. Those of us that do environmental compliance work, when you have an environmental activist ask you what are the risks that your plant or that emission is going to cause cancer. And I don't care how much control technology you put on it, the fact that there may be one molecule of SO2 or CO2 going out that stack means that I can't say there's 0 going out. I can't say there's 0 risk. I can't say that. I can say it's very, very minimal. I can say we've done a lot to minimize the risk. We've added a lot of zeros, but I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee any of us, all of us will make it home alive tonight. So when folks ask me, how can you guarantee, or can you guarantee that the convention won't do this or won't do that, or the states won't do this, I can't guarantee anything. I can minimize the risk. I can add zeros. I can talk about adding more zeros, but I can never get it to be zero. This is a challenge. This is a challenge. So there's options. I've got a list here. It's my list, so I get to put up my votes. The only reason I have those three in yellow is that I don't think they're enough soon enough. I have no objections with any of them, although I think just hoping for the best, prepare for the worst is effectively the same as doing nothing. I don't think doing nothing is an option for any of us. And this is my last kind of series of slides here. Some of you may have heard of the Tytler cycle, which was originally attributed to an old Scottish historian. I understand he had nothing to do with it. He did talk about the life cycle of a democracy or a constitutional republic, but he never organized it in this fashion. So you start with faith and you go around the horn. I've actually seen people assign decades or dates to these things based on starting in 1776 and then going around the horn here. For me, it's easy to think about maybe the first 125 years of our republic was kind of on the right side, and it's clearly on the left side. A majority of our population is moving through around back to the top. I don't think every U.S. citizen is all of us are all in this exact same place. I think there's a distribution across this, but clearly the peak, if you will, is sliding around clockwise on this thing. And so for me, the question is, can we break the cycle? Are we deep enough into complacency and apathy that people will wake up enough to take action and prevent us from having to complete the loop? Can we short circuit this thing? Can we get back to the right side of the cycle? And I am done.
What problem is that? All right, well, let's move ahead. I call this talk a constitutional convention under a microscope. Right? I'm going to start off with a little bit of, I don't think I need the mic. Let me know if I do.
Yeah, you do need it.
I want everybody to
Need the mic.
need the mic. Okay. I put up a little bit of what I call lost awareness. This is something that Americans used to know and a lot of Americans don't know today. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. So we've got a great Constitution and we want to make sure it stays. We want to keep it and not take it away. I'm going to skip ahead here because I'm only supposed to talk for half an hour. All right, I got a question for everyone here. All right, do current government officials obey the limitations on their powers contained in the Constitution? No. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. Here's the next question. Will current government officials who don't abide by the existing limitations honor the limitations in a new amendment?
No.
Yes.
So then why are we here?
Yes.
It depends. Well, we'll see. Okay. The real need is better government officials, especially in the House of Representatives. And I'll make that case later and tell you why I'm focusing on the House of Representatives. Right? Now, there are people who want to amend the Constitution. They claim to want improvement. But they will open it up for a complete overhaul and call for a constitutional convention. Now, you can call it a convention of the states, you can call it something else, you can call it this, you can call it that. There's only one process that's in the Constitution itself, and it's called the Constitutional Convention. So we're going to stick with that terminology and not talk about a convention of the states or anything else. A constitutional convention is what we should be discussing. There are two ways to have a constitutional convention. There are two ways to amend the Constitution. The first way is 2/3 of both houses of Congress agree to propose amendments. Such amendments must be then ratified by 3/4 of the states. This process had led to 27 amendments. 27 amendments in much more than 200 years of the existence of the Constitution. Now that says one thing. It says one of two things. It says either that the Constitution was pretty good in the first place and didn't need amendment, or it says that the people are too silly or too involved in fluff and other things to not even bother with it. Well, now let's look at the 27 amendments. The first 10, of course, are the Bill of Rights. And I consider that as much a part of the original Constitution as the Constitution itself. Right? So we're down to 17. And then we see that there's one amendment to outlaw the manufacture and distribution of alcohol, which was later nullified by another amendment that canceled the First Amendment. So there's two that canceled each other. So we're down to 15. We have 15 amendments in 200 and almost 240 years. I think that says something good about the Constitution. Now, the other process for amending the Constitution is the Constitutional Convention. 2/3 of the states petition Congress, that's key, Congress, to create a con-con. All amendments resulting from this convention must be ratified by 3/4 of the states if the convention hasn't altered or abolished the process for the states to amend. Right? Can a constitutional convention alter the process for the states? Well, we've only had one constitutional convention in the history of our country. It was held under the Articles of Confederation, which is the government of the United States during the War for Independence. Now, the Articles of Confederation required that if you're going to amend it, you have to get it unanimous. You have to get all 13 states. So they got together to revise the Articles of Confederation via the amendment process, and they said, well, this is crazy. This thing isn't worth amending, and they got rid of it. They just simply, in effect, tore it up and threw it away. The Articles of Confederation were dead. And for the period of the Constitutional Convention until the time that it was ratified, the new Constitution, we didn't have a federal government. Can that happen again? What they did was also alter the process for the states to ratify. They went from a unanimous 13 down to 3/4, 9. Where did they get the authority to do that? Well, it turns out that a constitutional convention is, in effect, a sovereign body. It can do whatever it wants. And it was shown by the tossing out of the Articles of Confederation and coming up with a whole new constitution. The U.S. Constitution, Alexander Hamilton said, amendments are for remedying defects, not for enacting new laws. So if there's a defect in the Constitution, you want to amend it to take care of the defect. The Convention of the States, there's no mention of any such thing in the Constitution of the United States. Absolutely no mention. Go to Article 5 in the Constitution and they talk about a constitutional convention. Ratification by the states, the 1787 Con had a mandate only to alter the Articles of Confederation. That was their mandate. But it canceled the articles and even changed the requirements from unanimous approval of amendments to only 3/4 of the states needed for approving the new Constitution and then adding new amendments after that. So they can do what they want. The Constitutional Convention is not limited. Now, there are myths regarding a Constitutional Convention. The myths are that the states can control a con. That's a myth. No, they can't. Once it starts, then it's a sovereign body. Amendments can be limited is a myth. No, you can't limit the amendments. In fact, the only Constitutional Convention in the history of our country proved that that was the case. They threw away the other one and started a whole new process. A myth state ratification process will bar mischief. No, no. If there might not even be a state ratification process. That's the point that has to be considered. A con can't change the whole Constitution. It can, and it did in 1787. A convention of the states is allowed under Article 5? No, a convention of the states is not allowed under Article 5. The process in Article 5 said states petition Congress to call a constitutional convention. So who's in charge? Are the states still in charge? No. Congress is in charge, right? Nancy Pelosi's in charge. Harry Reid's in charge, right? And even some of these Republicans that I wouldn't give you a plug nickel for. Although I do believe that there are more good Republicans today than there were previously. Okay, now, if you have a constitutional convention, let's ask some questions. How do you choose the delegates? There's no process for that. How many delegates per state? No process for that. Expenses, who will pay the people who go to the Constitutional Convention? Who's going to be the chairman? Again, is it going to be Harry Reid? Where to hold the con? Are you going to hold it in the East Coast and keep people from the West from wanting to come because it's all the way across the country? I don't know. What about the safety of the delegates? Who's going to take care of it? I mean, you're going to have a Ferguson, Missouri type situation while they're meeting in the Constitutional Convention? Right? So all of these questions are answered by the Constitution itself. Article 5 says the Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And Article 1, Section 8 grants power to Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers in Section 8 and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. So Congress will decide. They will decide what? They will decide how to choose the delegates. They will decide how many delegates per state. They will decide the expenses. They will figure out a way to pay the people who go to it. They will select the chairman. They will decide where to hold the con. The safety of the delegates. Now, would you want to turn all of that over to some of the people who are in Congress today? No. Nor would I. Nor would I. Who favors a con? Right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of quick fix artists. Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, has been mentioned. Limbaugh, Hannity, and Beck, quick fix artists in my view. The National Tax Limitation Committee, National Taxpayers Union, the Goldwater Institute. I called up down to Goldwater Institute. I've met Barry Goldwater Jr. over the years, and I asked to be put through to him. He answered the phone. I said, Mr. Goldwater, John McManus from John Birch Society. Oh, he says, how you doing? What's up? I said, I'm just calling to ask, is it true that the Goldwater Institute is in favor of a con? He said, yes, it is. And I said, and you are yourself? Yes, yes, I am. I said, I guess that's the end of the discussion, right? And it was. I'm sorry to hear that. Well, anyhow, there are other people. George Soros' name has been mentioned. It's the bottom of my list. George Soros doesn't directly fund a lot of these things. He funds some of the activities indirectly, right? Things like the Wolfpack organization and some of these others. There are leftists who favor a con. The Young Turks, that's, I think, the Soros-funded organization. Harvard University's Lawrence Lessig, who recently came back from another Bilderberger meeting. The Alliance for Democracy, the Code Pink, the Independent Progressive Network. I hate the way they use this word progressive. Anybody who says he's a progressive in my way is regressive. Progressive Democrats of America, Sierra Club, Vermont for Single Payer, right? Opponents of a con. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Phyllis Schlafly, Edwin Vieira, Tom DeWeese, former Justice Warren Burger, former Justice Arthur Goldberg, late Judge Robert Bork, Professor Lawrence Tribe of Harvard, Professor Charles Rice of Notre Dame, Professor Gerald Gunther, Stanford, John Birch Society. A lot of people are opponents, more opponents. Some on the left, American Civil Liberties Union, American Federation of Teachers, Americans for Democratic Action, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the NAACP, National Organization for Women, People for the American Way. Some of these groups worry that the Bill of Rights might be canceled, right? And they should worry about that. So it's quite a mixture of different people. Now, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger stated in a letter, the participants in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 had no authority to write a constitution. They were authorized only to revise the Articles of Confederation. But when they got to Philadelphia, they paid no attention to those limits and wisely threw the whole thing away and wrote the Constitution. Right? And that could happen again. Now, if it was thrown away today, if our Constitution that we have today was thrown away, what might come afterward? Something that James Madison and George Washington and some of the other founding fathers of our country would put together? I doubt it. I doubt it very, very sincerely. Right? Former Chief Justice Warren Burger, he isn't opposed to amendments. He expressed his opposition to a constitutional convention that would have the power to void the entire Constitution. Now, are there any good amendments that I would favor? Yeah. I would like to see repeal of the Amendment 16, the federal income tax. I would like to see repeal of the Amendment 17, the direct election of senators. There are very few Americans who realize that the purpose of having two houses in the federal government was one to represent the people and the other to represent the states. Right? And the states were to choose who would be their senators. And that was changed to a direct election of senators. So now we have a House of Representatives, the voice of the people, and a Senate, the voice of the people. Right? And the power of the states has been cast adrift. Now, many of the people who favor a constitutional convention are anxious for a balanced budget amendment. Right? They say, look, we've got $18 trillion indebted that they admit to, and you can go on from that, and you'll add up to well over $100 trillion in unfunded obligations that the federal government has already passed. An enormous amount of indebtedness. It's a hard to imagine number of dollars that they're talking about. So they say, okay, we got to have a balanced budget amendment. But expecting government officials to honor an amendment when they already don't honor the Constitution makes no sense. Some balanced budget amendment proposals allow for 60% in Congress to override it. Some call for tax increases if the budget isn't balanced. That's one way of balancing the budget. Right? Increase the taxes. Some say budget doesn't have to be balanced if there's a war or a national security threat. Right? Some say balanced budget provisions wouldn't take effect for 5 years, meaning at least trillions more added to the already enormous debt in the meantime. And then some say that the way to get around the deficit problem is to declare some expenditures off budget. That's pretty clever, isn't it? And balanced budget amendments ignore the enormous deficit already accumulated, $18 trillion plus many more trillions of unfunded obligations. Now, there are good ways to balance the budget, and this is what the John Birch Society is in favor of. Congress can cut spending programs for unconstitutional programs. Congress can nullify laws and programs. That's what should be done. Let's not tinker with the Constitution. Unused power in Article 1, Section 7. It actually says that all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House. The power of the purse at the federal level resides in the House of Representatives. If a majority in the House of Representatives say no more foreign aid, no more this, no more that, no more that, that's it. There's nothing the Senate can do about it, nothing the President can do about it, nothing the Supreme Court can do about it, not even the New York Times can do anything about it. That's what we ought to be focusing on. What are some unconstitutional federal programs that Congress can stop by simply stopping the funding of them? Foreign aid, education. Common Core? Yeah.
Yeah.
Housing, energy, medical care, etc., etc., etc. On and on you go. Added authority, Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Go back over that list. Can anybody show me the word education in the Constitution of the United States? It's not there. Can you show me housing? Can you show me energy? Can you show me medical care? Can you show me foreign aid? And yet this goes on and on and on. Right? We've dropped the ball. We, the American people, have dropped the ball. We're allowing this to happen to ourselves. It's time to take the ball back and get busy. Cut spending via the Constitution. No federal expenditures for foreign aid, education. How well we've gone over all that, right? All right, now let's look at some contrasting proposals here. Use Article 1, Section 7 to cut spending. You need 218 in the House of Representatives. That's a majority. There are 435. 218 is just over the 50%. You don't need anybody in the Senate, and there's no role for state ratifications. So the total you need to cut spending is 218 in the House. Create a balanced budget amendment. What do you need? Well, you need 290 in the House, you need 67 in the Senate, and you need many hundreds in state governments to get that done. And your total adds up to thousands of people you've got to persuade in order to get that done. So which do you choose? Isn't garnering of only 218 in the House easier than getting 290 in the House, 67 in the Senate, and majorities in both houses of state legislatures? Also, isn't the First Amendment safer? Won't it protect the Constitution? Use the Constitution. Don't abuse it. Don't change it. The safe and elected solution: elect reliable members to the House of Representatives. Then the Senate, then the presidency. But if the House of Representatives will start using the muscle that it already has, called the power of the purse, senators would catch on, and maybe even we'd have a president that we'd be proud of. Now, I like to refer to James Madison. He was the 4th president of our country. He's rightly called the father of the Constitution. He's the one who took notes at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. He's one of the authors of the Federalist Papers to explain the Constitution to the farmers in New York State. He's the author of the Bill of Rights. He became a member of Congress, and he's an opponent of another con-con. What did he say? He said the authority given to conduct the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 was limited and was for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. They went beyond that mandate. And so a year later, Madison wrote a letter, and in that letter he said, having witnessed the difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, which assembled under very propitious circumstances, I should tremble for the result of a second. Right? What were the very propitious circumstances? Well, the very first of them was it was led by George Washington. George Washington, who had such stature and who was so highly regarded by all of those men that when he entered the room, everybody hushed. Right? And he was the head of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Very propitious circumstance there. Another comment, Judge Robert Bork, recently deceased. It is my view that a federal constitutional convention could not be limited to a single issue. The original Philadelphia Convention went well beyond the purposes for which it was called, and nobody has suggested the Constitution is a nullity for that reason. Interpret the Constitution. Now, you ask your co-workers, your neighbors, maybe you and your spouse, maybe somebody else you know, your people you run across, what's the job of the Supreme Court? And almost everybody, if they have any answer at all, will say it's to interpret the Constitution, which is dead wrong. It's not to interpret the Constitution. The task is to rule that a measure is or is not constitutional. Most decisions should be state at the end of it, it's none of our business, and handing the matter back down to the states and to the people themselves. We wrongly allow leaders to make a federal case out of virtually everything. When I was a boy growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I would skin my knee. There weren't many grassy plots around there. And I'd come in and I'd be bawling my eyes out, and my mother would say, "Oh, stop making a federal case out of this." Maybe your mother said the same, right? But they make a federal case. We do over and over again. Now, beginning in 1988, the John Birch Society and a few allies persuaded state legislators in 18 different states to rescind all of the previous con calls, whether it was for a balanced budget amendment or term limits or opposed to abortion or flag burning or whatever. Our attitude was simply that it doesn't matter what issue, if a state has a call for a constitutional convention, it's one of the 30 some odd that are needed in order to call a constitutional convention. So we asked the state legislators to cancel all previous calls for a constitutional convention. And the states of Alabama, Arizona, Georgia, Idaho, Florida, Louisiana, Montana, North Dakota, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Utah, and Wyoming did as was asked. They wiped the slates clean. Florida then came back later and issued a new con call. So the 18 is now down to 17 that have totally rescinded all their, right? But the other process to control an out-of-control Congress is nullification. In 2005, Congress enacted what is called the Real ID Act, requiring a federal ID for everybody in the United States. 24 states have refused to implement it, and we don't have a Real ID Act. It wasn't repealed. This is what's called nullification. The states can do that, and 24 states did, and so the federal government does not enforce the Real ID Act. Nullification was advocated by Thomas Jefferson, that a nullification by those sovereignties, the states, of all unauthorized acts done under the color of that instrument, the Constitution, is the rightful remedy. More of that should happen. There's a wonderful book written by a good friend of mine named Dr. Thomas E. Woods about nullification. The title of the book is Nullification, right? And it's really a small book because half of what you see in the book is appendix. Right? You can get the gist of what he's saying. He's quoting Jefferson, he's quoting others. The book has been praised by Judge Andrew Napolitano, columnist Walter Williams, Barry Goldwater Jr., the John Birch Society, numerous others. Nullification is an option. Here's James Madison again. Nullification of a law can belong rightly to a single state as one of the parties of the Constitution. The state not ceasing to avow its adherence to the entire Constitution by nullifying something. Summarize. A con is constitutionally legitimate, but a con cannot be limited. It has to be something that says having a con would be a mistake, or else we would have had one in 200 and almost 240 years. There never has been another. I don't want to see another. Excuse me. Oh, you're gonna water for me here. Is it just water? I'm Irish. I'm Irish. It's just water. Just water. A con cannot be limited. Wisdom has prevented creation of a con for the past 220, maybe it's more than 220 years now. Alternatives to a con include forcing Congress to abide by its solemn oath and nullification of unconstitutional measures. So I'm going to go back to lost awareness, where we started. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. Right? Wouldn't you like to see them teaching that in all the government schools, right? So who should you listen to? The John Birch Society loves the Constitution enough to want to preserve it. Some con promoters, some calling their proposal a convention of the states, claim to love it, but they seek to change it, even endanger its very existence. I think that's a mistake. So we've got to choose good leadership. Do we choose neoconservatives?
No.
Rhinos?
No.
Unreliable politicians?
No.
Establishment leftists?
No.
Why not choose leadership from the John Birch Society? Now just imagine, ladies and gentlemen, just imagine. Several hundred well-informed and well-organized citizens spreading sound information in a congressional district and then in hundreds of districts. That's the goal of the John Birch Society. Right? It has already worked in some parts of the country. There's no reason why it couldn't work here. There's no reason why it couldn't work even in Massachusetts or Rhode Island. Right? Several hundred, and I'm talking what, 300, 400, 500 people in a congressional district can sway the whole district. Maybe not inner city New York, that would take a few more. But this is the plan. It's always been the plan. We got a book table, we got a motto. Less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. So we say to people, look, you're good, you have a good group here, keep at it. Maybe some of you want to also join the John Birch Society. That's good. We'll be glad to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.